Hi, I'm Caroline Wood, and I'm on Willow Grove Beach in Cowlitz County in southwest Washington State. Right behind me is the Columbia River, and 50 miles down is the Pacific Ocean. And in front of me is a likeness in miniature of a Chinookan canoe. Now some, in actual size, have been known to be 15 to 30 to 40 feet in length. Some have even been known to be 60 feet long. This river was once similar to our busy highways of today, full of people going here and there. When Lewis and Clark arrived in 1805, they were shocked to discover the population density was greater than back east. The mode of transportation on the river was the dugout canoe. So with that in mind, the canoe being the vehicle of transportation, let's take another look. Where are the paddlers, and why the woven mat? And what about the passengers? Well, there is a passenger, a corpse. You see, this is a coffin, and it's on a journey to the land of the dead, and the river will take it there. If we were in the early part of the 19th century, it would be a pretty safe bet that this canoe came from a point upriver 3 miles away. A very spectacular place. A sacred place. In 1792, British Lieutenant William Broughton, the first European to ascend the Columbia River from its mouth, came upon this ancient sacred site. The lieutenant wrote,
"A remarkable mount, about which were placed canoes containing dead bodies. To this was given the name Mount Coffin."
The first people began living here along the Columbia River and its tributaries more than 10,000 years ago. There is a medicine wheel located on a hilltop a little ways from here. The archaeologists have dated back to 20,000 years. So who knows? After Broughton, more explorers, hunters, and traders wrote down their impressions of what the lieutenant named Mount Coffin, and the people of the land called Yi-hi-mas-ti. William Clark of Lewis and Clark, in November of 1805, wrote in his journal,
"I had liked to have forgotten a very remarkable knob rising from the edge of the water. All over this rock, top, sides, and bottom, were placed canoes of all sorts and sizes, containing relics of the dead, the congregated dust of many ages."
And Gabriel Francher, a Canadian with the Astor Company, and later author, wrote,
"This rock appeared to me remarkable on account of its situation, reposing in the midst of a low and swampy ground, as if it had been dropped from the clouds."
In 1835, naturalist John Kirk Townsend was in a ship at anchor not far from Mount Coffin.
"The vicinity of this place is held so sacred by the Indians that they never approach it, except to make similar deposits."
He persisted himself to walk freely among the tombs and inspect them, being careful not to disturb the dead.
"And it was well that we were so, for as we turned to leave the place, we found we had been narrowly watched by about 20 Indians whom we had not seen when we landed from our boat. After we embarked, we observed an old withered crone with a long stick or wand in her hand, who approached and walked over the ground which we had defiled with our sacrilegious tread, waving her enchanted rod over the moldering bones, as if to purify the atmosphere around and to exorcise the evil spirits which we had called up."
Months later, John Townsend went back to the sacred burial site, this time to steal from the dead.
I thought several times today, as I had often done in similar situations before, Now suppose an Indian were to step in here and see me groping among the bones of his fathers and laying unhallowed hands upon the moldering remains of his people. What should I say?
In 1841, American Lieutenant Charles Wilkes, while on an exploring expedition, found that Mount Coffin, at 225 feet high, provided an excellent view for his surveying crew. At the end of the day, they made a fire, cooked their meal, ate their dinner, and returned to their ship.
I regretted to see that the fire had spread and was enveloping the whole area of the mount. But there was no help for it. The flames continued to rage throughout the night until all was burned.
Those thousands upon thousands of original people who had lived here from time immemorial had come close to extinction from diseases brought by the white people. The tribes and bands were now scattered, and individuals did their best to create new villages and do what they could to survive in their once abundant homeland that was now under siege. Wilkes was right when he wrote,
The Indians showed much indignation at the violation of a place which was held so sacred by them, and would no doubt have sought revenge had they felt themselves strong enough to do so.
In 1863, Daniel Webster Bush bought a land claim owned by Noyes Stone and Orland George. He acquired Mount Coffin at the same time. 45 years later, in 1908, Daniel Bush sold the sacred site to Star Sand Company for $11,000. The quarry company moved in a rock crusher, and for 32 years, at 1 million tons a year, blasted, crushed, and barged the ancient burial site away. I'm on Industrial Way. Oh, it's upriver 3 miles from Willow Grove Beach. On my right is the Weyerhaeuser Pulp and Paper Mill, completed in 1929. This is where Mount Coffin stood. The mill was built on foundations made from the basalt rocks taken from Mount Coffin. I spoke with Cowlitz spiritual leader Roy Wilson at his home not far from the Cowlitz River in Toledo, Washington. I asked him about Mount Coffin.
Maybe I can put it this way. Let's say that your mother or your grandma or grandpa were buried in a cemetery in Longview. And I came and tore up the headstone, destroyed the whole cemetery, put a plant of some kind on there. Would you be upset with me? Would that be a tragedy, the way I dishonored the sacredness of the resting place of your ancestors? You see, Mount Coffin was a place where we buried our ancestors were buried. That was our cemetery, one of our many cemeteries, but that was our cemetery. When they not only set fire to it, Lieutenant Charles Wilkes, supposedly, evidently, wanting to do something in ecological nature, but destroyed those many canoes in which people were buried in. When they came along and Star Sand and Gravel bought the land claim and took Mount Coffin, which Lewis and Clark said was something like 225 feet tall, and about a mile around it at the base. They destroyed it, took it down with a rock crusher piece by piece until it was level with all the surrounding ground around it. They destroyed the old cemetery. They destroyed what you might call today the gravestones. The whole mountain is gone. It's not there anymore. What a tragedy. What a tragedy. What a desecration of a sacred place. It would not be allowed today in a white man's cemetery, but it happened to my Indian ancestors and to our people.
Mm-hmm. A Chinookan plank house has been replicated on the Ridgefield National Wildlife Refuge in Ridgefield, Washington. I went to the Chinookan winter gathering there and asked archaeologist Ainan Raymond about the first people.
Well, the discipline of archaeology is one in which today, 21st century people or Americans can learn about the culture of people that lived 100, 200, or 500 or 1,000 years ago. Excuse me. And it's a valuable approach to history in the past because we often forget that Lewis and Clark were not the first people to come to the Northwest. People have been living in the Northwest for over 10,000 years. And they're people just like you and me. They're Homo sapiens, and their lifestyle and culture is totally different than the one that we practice today. And they thrived in this area for 10,000 years. And so there's something to learn from that. It's not necessarily better or worse than our lifestyle today, but it's equally valid. And as such, I think it's important that for all people to gain that alternate perspective. And that alternate perspective is provided through the discipline of archaeology and its associated disciplines of history and ethnography to put together a description of the culture of the people that have lived here for a lot longer than we have.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel that too much time has gone by for us to reach back into the past and bring it forward to be able to use it and weave it together?
No, not at all. You know, of course, things, the older they are, the harder they are to recover and to recover accurately. But one of the things we have to remember about traditional culture, all cultures for that matter, is that they're never static. So culture, Native American culture today, Chinookan culture, Cowlick culture today has evolved from what it was 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 1,000 years ago. It still retains its own identity and its own characteristics as a Chinookan or Cowlitz or any Indian culture. But it comes from a different base, and it has a different perspective on the world than American culture, if you want to call it that. So, although we may not be able to recover the past, how it was exactly, say, 1,000 years ago, the disciplines of history and archaeology and ethnography help us to identify that baseline. But I think it's really important to connect that to the people living today, the descendants of that culture that's 500 years ago. And because it's just as viable, it's just as alive, and again, it's an alternative perspective on the world, and I think we are richer for that.
An alternative perspective. I like that. Now, one could argue to let the tide take the stories of old to the land of the dead, but I would argue against it, believing there is much to learn from the stories of long ago. The stories that taught and gave root and a sense of belonging to it all being the great mystery. What was it about Mount Coffin that William Clark would have liked to have forgotten? He knew his presence and the arrival of the expedition would be the death of this new old world. I wonder how he felt about that. The tide is going out. In the not too distant future, we'll be the people of long ago. We're all on a journey.